What happens when a routine traffic stop turns into pure humiliation? A black doctor, exhausted after saving lives in the hospital, gets pulled over under the flashing red and blue lights. He stays calm, polite, hands on the wheel, showing respect, but the officer isn't interested in respect. His anger boils over, and in a split second, the cop leans in and delivers a hard slap across the doctor's face. The sound of that slap echoes louder than the siren. But what the officer doesn't know is that this assault, caught on camera, will not only expose his hatred, it will soon leave him begging desperately for the very job he thought made him untouchable. Before we dive in, make sure you hit like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Dr. Marcus Hill had just finished the kind of shift that would break most people. 20 straight hours in the emergency room, stitching together lives, holding hands of the dying, and making impossible choices that only a surgeon could make. His scrub still carried the faint smell of antiseptic and the weight of the day's tragedies. As he finally slid behind the wheel of his sedan, all he wanted was the quiet comfort of home, a hot shower, and maybe 3 hours of sleep before the hospital called him back. The city streets were nearly empty, the glow of streetlights stretching long shadows across the asphalt. Marcus kept his hand steady on the wheel, his mind drifting toward his daughter's smile, the one thing that made the endless nights worth it. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't distracted. He was simply existing, a black man in America driving home after work. And then the blue and red lights flared behind him. His chest tightened, not from guilt, but from the familiar dread that every black man knows too well. He slowed, carefully signaled, and pulled to the side of the road. His training as a doctor had taught him composure, his experience as a black man had taught him caution. He rolled down the window, turned off the radio, and kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. The officer's approach was aggressive from the first step. Heavy boots striking pavement, flashlight beam cutting through the window like an interrogation lamp. Marcus spoke before the man could, his voice calm and respectful. "Good evening, officer. I just came off a hospital shift. Here's my ID and my license." He reached slowly toward his wallet, narrating each movement the way black parents teach their children to do. But the cop wasn't listening. His lip curled in disdain as he glanced at the hospital badge. "Hospital ID, huh? You think that makes you special?" the officer sneered. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd heard that tone in patients' families when they didn't want to trust a black surgeon. He knew better than to argue. "I'm just heading home, sir," Marcus replied evenly. But the officer leaned closer, his irritation escalating with every second of Marcus's calmness. It wasn't defiance, it was the quiet dignity that seemed to enrage him. He mocked Marcus's tone, accused him of being smart, and demanded answers to questions Marcus had already given. Inside the car, Marcus felt the familiar war between fear and discipline. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but he also knew the rules of survival: stay calm, stay polite, stay alive. His mind replayed the lectures he gave young black interns at the hospital: no matter how much you achieve, no matter the lives you save, some people will only see your skin first. And then it happened. The officer, face twisted with anger, suddenly raised his hand and struck Marcus across the face with a sharp, humiliating slap. The sound cracked through the night, louder than the sirens, sharper than the sting in his cheek. Marcus froze. Not from weakness, but from calculation. He knew this moment was bigger than him. He also knew the slap would change everything, because what the cop didn't realize was that someone nearby was already recording. The sting of the slap lingered on Dr. Marcus Hill's cheek, but it was the insult behind it that burned hotter than the pain. His head snapped slightly with the blow, yet he didn't raise his hands, didn't curse, didn't move. Years of discipline, both as a surgeon and as a black man navigating America, locked him in place. For a moment, silence filled the air. Only the steady hum of the patrol car's siren lights cut through the dark. The officer seemed almost startled by his own action, but pride and prejudice quickly stitched over his hesitation. "Don't look at me like that," the cop barked, his voice harsh, shaky at the edges. "I told you to respect me." Marcus inhaled slowly, his eyes steady. He didn't argue. He didn't lash out. He knew one wrong move, one misplaced word, and his life could end right there on the roadside. He had stitched up gunshot victims who hadn't lived long enough to explain what went wrong with their traffic stop. He would not become another headline tonight. Instead, he whispered calmly, "You just assaulted a physician, officer. Everything you've done is being recorded." The officer froze for half a second, scanning the dark street, suddenly aware of the phone lifted by a bystander across the road. The glowing rectangle of the camera lens seemed brighter than the patrol lights. His confidence cracked. But still, he doubled down. "I don't care who you are. You think being a doctor makes you untouchable?" He leaned closer, his voice lower now, more desperate than commanding. "Nobody's gonna believe you over me." Marcus didn't break eye contact. He simply repeated, louder this time, "You assaulted a physician. And it's on camera." The officer's jaw tightened. Sweat rolled down his temple despite the cool night air. He barked into his radio for backup, trying to reassert control. But his tone betrayed him. It sounded less like command and more like panic. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Their doors slammed, officers approached, but the shift in atmosphere was immediate. One of the newcomers recognized Marcus instantly. "Dr. Hill," the younger officer asked, eyes wide. "Sir, you're the surgeon who operated on my cousin last month. You saved her life." The words hung heavy in the night air. Suddenly, the power shifted. The officers looked from their colleague to Marcus, then to the bystander still filming. The truth was obvious. This wasn't a belligerent driver. This was a respected doctor, a man known in the community, a man whose calmness and dignity stood in stark contrast to the rage of the cop who had just struck him. The slapped officer's bravado faltered. His voice cracked as he snapped, "Turn that camera off," but no one obeyed. The other officer's eyes hardened, not at Marcus, but at him. The tension thickened, no longer between the cop and the doctor, but between the cop and everyone else. He could feel his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. The man he thought he could humiliate with a single slap now stood taller without moving an inch, while his own career began to unravel in real time. The street, once quiet, now pulsed with sirens, flashing lights, and murmurs from neighbors who had come out of their homes to see what the commotion was about. The slap had turned a simple traffic stop into a stage, and the officer who delivered it was no longer in control of the performance. He felt the weight of every eye on him, judging, questioning, condemning. Dr. Marcus Hill sat still in his car, his cheek faintly red, but his composure unshaken. That quiet strength unnerved the cop more than if Marcus had shouted back. His silence was louder than protest. His dignity was sharper than anger. The younger officer who had recognized Marcus now stood between them, a subtle but undeniable shift of power. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked Marcus directly, ignoring his fellow cop. The choice of who to address first made the aggressor bristle. "I said I'm handling this," the racist cop snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. He was resisting. The crowd stirred uneasily. Resisting? Everyone had seen the opposite. The phone cameras had caught Marcus keeping his hands on the wheel, his words calm, his demeanor professional. The narrative the officer tried to spin was already unraveling before it even began. Marcus finally spoke, his tone even and deliberate. "I was fully compliant. My hospital ID and driver's license are right here. This officer struck me across the face without provocation. I will be filing a report." Those words, spoken like testimony in a courtroom, landed like hammers. The watching officers exchanged glances. They weren't just dealing with a routine complaint, they were dealing with an assault charge, one witnessed by multiple people and backed by video evidence. The racist cop's hands twitched at his belt. His face, red with both fury and fear, shifted from denial to desperation. He tried to reassert authority, stepping toward Marcus with a wagging finger. "You think being a doctor makes you untouchable? You think anyone's going to take your word over mine?" But the trembling in his voice betrayed him. The onlookers didn't need to guess, they already knew whose word would hold weight. Especially when Marcus quietly added, "Do you know whose daughter I operated on last month?" The mayor's. Do you really think this is going away quietly? The officer froze. His throat went dry. He hadn't realized who he had laid hands on, not just a black man on the roadside, but a figure of immense respect and influence. Someone whose identity would make headlines. Someone whose story couldn't be buried. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Phones stayed raised, capturing every angle. The blue and red lights painted the officer's sweat-slick face like a man already caught in his own guilt. One of the other officers finally muttered what everyone was thinking. This is bad. Really bad. The aggressor's authority was gone. The badge that once shielded him now felt like a target pinned to his chest. His voice, once filled with arrogance, began to tremble with the realization of consequences barreling toward him. The buildup was complete. The officer wasn't standing on power anymore, he was teetering on the edge of ruin, and he knew it. The tension on Desert Pines Road had reached its breaking point. What began as a single officer flexing his authority had transformed into a public reckoning under flashing sirens and the glow of camera phones. Every second felt like a trial, and the jury was no longer just the crowd, it was the world that would soon see the video. Dr. Marcus Hill stepped out of his car slowly, deliberately, his hospital badge gleaming under the streetlight. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't shaking. His silence carried more power than the officer's loudest threats. The racist cop tried to intercept him, hand twitching toward his holster. But the younger officer blocked his path. Don't touch him again, he warned sharply. The shift was complete. Marcus was no longer the one being controlled, the aggressor was. The crowd erupted in whispers, some shouting, "We saw him slap the doctor." Others yelled, "It's all on camera." The officer's face drained of color. His shield, once a weapon of intimidation, now felt like a chain dragging him down. Marcus turned, finally addressing the crowd, his voice calm but resolute. "My name is Dr. Marcus Hill. I have worked in this city's hospital for 12 years. Tonight, on my way home after a 20-hour shift, I was stopped and struck across the face by this officer, without cause. You all saw it. And your cameras saw it too." The crowd roared in agreement, voices overlapping, "We got it all. It's recorded. Justice for the doctor." The officer's arrogance crumbled. He lunged forward, hands raised in a pitiful gesture, not of command, but of desperation. "Wait, listen, Doc, Marcus, Dr. Hill, please. You don't have to file a report. We can work this out. I didn't mean it." But his words only rang hollow. He had meant it. Everyone knew. Marcus didn't answer. He simply stood taller, his cheek still marked by the slap, his eyes unflinching. The silence pressed harder than any lecture. The officer's panic deepened. He tugged at his collar, sweat dripping, voice cracking into something dangerously close to begging. "Please, I've got a family, a mortgage, this job is everything I have. Don't ruin me over one mistake." The irony stung the night air. He had tried to ruin a man's dignity with one slap. Now that same slap was about to ruin his career. Another officer stepped in, shaking his head in disgust. "It's already over. You crossed the line. The camera doesn't lie." The racist cop's knees weakened. His voice shrank to a whisper, frantic, trembling. "Please, please, document, don't let them take my badge. Don't let me lose my job. I'm begging you." But Marcus remained silent. His refusal to respond was more powerful than any condemnation. He simply turned to the younger officer and said firmly, "I'll see you at Internal Affairs." And with that, the gavel of truth fell, not in a courtroom, but on a street corner. The officer, once drunk on power, now stood exposed, broken, and begging for the very thing he thought he could never lose. The flashing lights reflected off his hollow eyes as the cameras captured the fall of his arrogance, frame by frame. The once intimidating officer now stood exposed, trembling under the very lights that were supposed to protect him. His badge no longer carried weight, his words no longer held authority. The cameras had stripped him bare, leaving only the truth, a man who abused his power, now begging for mercy. Dr. Marcus Hill didn't need to shout, threaten, or retaliate. His silence and composure had done what anger never could, turn the world's eyes toward justice. The man who saved lives every day had just saved his own dignity without lifting a hand. As internal affairs was called and the officer was escorted away, the crowd applauded, not for vengeance, but for the courage of restraint. For the reminder that true strength isn't in power misused, but in dignity maintained. Marcus walked back to his car, calm, steady, his hospital badge shining like armor. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had been humiliated, silenced, or struck without cause. Tonight, the tables had turned, and a slap meant to degrade had become the cop's downfall. Moral, abuse of power will always backfire. Cameras don't just record, they reveal. And respect, once lost, can't be begged back. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to spread the message, subscribe so you never miss another story of truth and justice, and drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Dr. Hill's place? Share this video with someone who needs to see that dignity is stronger than hate. Together, we keep the spotlight on justice.